Bosai, we began last week the sugya of Pikuach Nefesh, and we'd like to continue with that sugya. So if you can, open up please to Daf Pei Dalid Omid Beis. Pei Dalid Omid Beis. And we're going to look at the Gemara of Mipnei Safek Nefashasu. So let's see where we can find that. If you have the structure of the page, you know that there are the thinner lines and then they get wider. So towards the end of the thinner lines, which would probably be approximately 20 lines down from the top of the page, you'll see Shin Mem, which is Shmamino. We're going to start right after that on the two dots. And the Gemara quotes the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Mipnei Safek Nefashasu. And Safek Nefashas Doche Es Hashab. So we don't have to know for sure that the situation is absolutely dire and that we absolutely have to violate the Shabbos to save lives or one life, as long as there's a suffix and there's a possibility that we might be able to save a life. That's enough to override the Shabbos. Now the Gemara wants to know, why did the Mishnah feel compelled to add the words "V'chol safek nefashos doche es haShabbos"? We already learned in the Mishnah that we can take whatever drugs are necessary as medicine, as therapeutic, and we can administer them on Shabbos. And if that be the case, it would seem obvious that safek nefashos are doches haShabbos. So the Gemara asks the following question. If you're following inside, just let me know if you don't find the place. The Lamali Su. Why did the Mishnah have to go on and add Lememar the following words? V'chol safek nefashos doche es haShabbos. We already know that if a person has an illness, the Mishnah has already spelled out that we can override Shabbos in order to save his life. Why did the Mishnah add another, what seems to be a redundant phrase, V'chol safek nefashos doche es haShabbos? What's the chiddush that inheres in that additional phrase? You know, the Mishnah is very concise and very abridged. There are no extra words. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, what does the Tana want to teach me here? Lo safek b'Shabbos zu bilvad. We can violate the Shabbos not only if there's a safek on this Shabbos, but afilu al afilu safek b'Shabbos acheres. Meaning, we can violate this Shabbos, even though it's only going to be meaningful for next Shabbos. Not every Shabbos is an entity unto itself, independent. And the Gemara is going to explain what the scenario is. What does it mean that I'm overriding this Shabbos for the sake of next Shabbos? Hechi dami. Egon. The Amdua Lismanya Yomi. The medical experts have evaluated the situation and they've determined that this medication has to be taken for 8 days, consecutively, for 8 days. The Yoma Kama Shabsa. The first of the 8 days is on Shabbos. Mal de Tema, I could have argued logically that in this case, that there's a suffix, whether or not something might lead to the death of a person is therefore li'akev ad li'urta. Why don't we just wait until Motzei Shabbos? After all, we have 8 days. Why violate 2 Shabbosos from one Shabbos and the next Shabbos is 8 days? Why not wait till after Shabbos? We'll still have the 8-day period, but without violating the Shabbos. So we would save ourselves the violation of 2 Shabbosos and reduce it to violation of 1 Shabbos. Komash Malon, the Sefer, the last part of this Mishnah, wants to teach us that Sofek Nefashos Docha Es HaShabbos, meaning even the first Shabbos. You might argue, well, it's not necessary. Why override the Shabbos unnecessarily? Just simply wait till after Shabbos, and you'll get that 8-day period of medical therapy. Why violate 2 Shabbosos when you can reduce it to 1? And the Mishnah wants to tell me no. Right now, we have a Sofek Nefashos. There's a person who is urgently in need of a medical therapy that requires overriding the Shabbos. We're not going to postpone it. We're not going to wait for 1 minute. Even though the physicians tell me that it has to be sometime during this 24-hour period, which means it could be after Shabbos. And you can imagine in a winter Shabbos in this part of the world, where Shabbos enters and exits at 4 p.m., 5 p.m. in the afternoon, why give the medicine and administer that medical therapy that requires violating the Shabbos at 9 in the morning? Simply wait another 8 hours, make Havdalah, and you could spare yourself a violation of one of the 2 Shabbos. And the halach is no, we will not postpone any medical therapy for a chola that could be in danger, and we will not try to make calculations here. Well, maybe if I wait, I'll save and spare the violation, desecration of 1 Shabbos. Right now, we have a chola, and this chola comes under the category of Sofek Nefashos. We don't make any smart alecky calculations. Now it's the first day in which we're administering medical therapy that will last for 8 days. We will violate not 1 Shabbos, but 2 Shabbos. Tanya Nami Hachi. The Gemara feels compelled to quote a brisa that would support this rule, this psak. And the brisa says, "Mechamemin chamin lechola b'Shabbos." We will heat up water on Shabbos, turn on the fire for a chola. Bein lahashkoso ubein lahavroso. Whether we need the mayim to have him drink hot water, or we need to bathe him in hot water. The lo Shabbazu bilvad amru, not only when we need it for this Shabbos, maybe we don't need it for this Shabbos. Ella l'Shabbos acheres. Even if we would not endanger his life, if we omit this heating up of the water on this Shabbos, he is not going to lose his life, chas v'shalom, because we waited until after Shabbos. We only need it for the next Shabbos. Nevertheless, we're machal this Shabbos as well. Now the brisa continues. The ein omrim, the brisa is outspoken about rejecting the other opinion, the counter argument. Ein omrim, don't say namtin lo. We're not going to heat up the water. Sheva Yavri, maybe he'll get better on his own. Ela mechamim lo miyad, mipnei shesofek nefashos doches haShabbos. The lo sofek b'Shabbosu, not only is it this Shabbos, elafilu safek Shabbos acheres. Even if there's a safek that he might die a week from now. Now, once we've discussed the question of possibly limiting the desecration of Shabbos by waiting till after Shabbos, and we've rejected that, let's ask a different question. Can we limit the violation of the Shabbos by asking a guy to do the malach? No. Ein osim dvar malolu. Whatever desecration of Shabbos could possibly save the life of a chole, ein osim dvar malolu lo yedei nachrim v'lo yedei kusiim ela al yedei gedolei Yisrael. The greatest leaders of the people will be in charge of desecrating the Shabbos. Don't try to get yourself a guy or a kusi. Kusi is a non-Jew whose status is a little bit questionable, but rather Gedolei Yisrael. And I would say the following, that we're talking not only about a heter, that the Torah gives you leniency, a license to override the Shabbos, but we're talking about a mitzvah of Hatzalah. We're not violating the Shabbos, we're fulfilling a mitzvah of saving lives. And that mitzvah should be fulfilled by Gedolei Yisrael without hesitation. There's no desecration of Shabbos. I'm not sure why the Brisa repeats kusiim a second time, but anyway, don't take the attitude. Let the women folk take care of it. You know, I'm the the rabbi of the shul. I don't want to get involved in the Chil Shabbos. You know the old phrase, let the viber do it. And certainly not al pi kusiim. Shemhem sha'omru shetzach chalas Shabbos avur chola ein shomim lahem. Avol mitztarfim l'das acheres. Here we have a case of a physician who's a kusi. And as a general rule, the halacha doesn't trust the testimony of a kusi. We don't rely on a kusi. For example, if we didn't know if this animal was slaughtered properly and the meat is geshachted, we would not rely on the testimony of a kusi. But what happens if a physician who is a kusi would testify that this fellow is in danger? He's a chole b'sakana, and we need to override the Shabbos. We don't rely on the testimony of a kusi. Let's say, for example, we have 3 doctors on the one side that say he'll survive it. We don't have to violate the Shabbos. We have 2 doctors on the other side who say, no. It's urgent. His situation is dire. We must immediately, urgently violate the Shabbos. So we have a halacha called Rov Deos, which means that we rule based on the majority. So we have 3 that say he doesn't need, he's not a chola, and he will survive it. We have 2 that say, no. So the 3 outvote the 2. But now we added a 3rd testimony that he needs immediate care. It's urgent. His life is in danger. We have to violate the Shabbos. Who is giving that 3rd testimony? It's a kusi. And we're going to add the kusi to the numbers here. We never trust the kusi, but in this context, to complete the number 3 against the 3 that say that he doesn't need violation of the Shabbos, we will include the kusi. We will invite him to express his evaluation. And if he gives us the rule that you must override the Shabbos, we will rely on him. He will be the determining physician to allow us to override the Shabbos. And why is that? Because once we get 3 against 3, then we have a situation of safek nefashos lahak. Rabbanon mefakrin pikuach nefesh b'Shabbos. Will do every last involvement, every last Hishtadlus meaning possible efforts, even if they involve desecrating the Shabbos, because Safek Nefashis Lahakel. And you never know which extra effort and violation of the Shabbos might, at the end of the day, save the life of the Chola. Hazaris, and if a person is very, we call it alacrity in fancy English, but he's very excited and he immediately goes ahead to administer this medical treatment in order, and involves overriding the Shabbos in order to save a life, Harei Zeh Meshubach. Even though there's a violation of Melecha Shabbos, which is a chiv skila, it's a capital crime. Shabbos is considered like Avodah Zarah. If you violate the Shabbos, it's like you denied God. Nevertheless, Harei Zeh Meshubach, he is violating a Malach of Shabbos, and we're going to give him a prize for that. We're going to praise him because he took the initiative without hesitation to violate the Shabbos for the sake of saving a life. He may say, wait a minute, I'm nervous. I don't want to violate the Shabbos. He's shaking. Let me go to Bezdin and let the rabbis paskin clearly and explicitly that I have to violate the Shabbos. No. Zariz Harei Zeh Meshubach. Don't waste a moment of time in a case of Safek Nefashos to ask Bezdin. HaKetzad? He saw a baby that's drowning. Again, the Gemara gives the example of an ocean. Today, in our time, tragically, it's more common in the case of a swimming pool. Pores mitzuda umaleu. He should immediately put in a net and lift up the child, because possibly, the child's life is in danger. The child slipped and fell into water. You don't know what's going to happen. Don't start playing games over here and saying, well, I don't want to violate the Shabbos. The child will be okay. I don't want to go to take it upon myself. I want to first get the license, the geshmaka, the okay from Bezdin. No. Hazaris Harei Zeh Meshubach. No questions, no issues, no delays. Jump in there, take a net, whatever you need to save the child. Now, why did the Brisa add this last phrase? The ein tzarich litol reshus mi bezdin. He doesn't have to get the license from the bezdin. The Mishnah, the Brisa had already said, Zariz Harei Zeh Meshubach. I would understand that Zariz means he doesn't wait a minute, doesn't delay, he just does it. He's a Zariz, and he gets the accolades. Why does the Brisa feel compelled to add the words the ein tzarich litol reshus mi bezdin? Says the Gemara, you know what the chiddush is here? Afal gav de kotsoyid kavre. Very interesting. What happens is, again, this is not true for a swimming pool, but out in the sea, when he scoops up the child with a net, and he uses a fisherman's net to save the child, inevitably, he's going to also capture some fish in the same net. And that's a violation of one of the 39 malachas, namely Meleches Tzeidah. And he's nervous. He is shuddering. How can I violate a malacha d'oraisa and desecrate the Shabbos? Maybe the child will be okay. Maybe I can find another way of saving the child. No, don't dilly-dally and don't ask Bezdin. By the time you run to Bezdin, chas v'sholom, catastrophe may happen. So they were matir him to go in and do whatever he has to do, even if he'll be involved in a violation of malacha d'oraisa for the sake of Safek Nefashos. Don't ask Bezdin, and don't ask the rabbi. Just jump in there and do it yourself immediately. Ra tinok shenafal a bar. He sees a child that fell into a pit. Oker chulya. What he does is he takes off what's called a gush. Gush means a section of the earth. He breaks it off at the outer lip of the ditch, so that now he can lean over and reach deeper and deeper into the bar. Umaleu, and he lifts up the child. He should do it immediately. Once again, the Gemara wants, so what's the extra chiddush of Ein Tzarich Litel B'Reshus Bezdin? Afal Gav de Misakein Darga, by removing some of the surface level earth around the Sfasa bar, he's doing what's called a Tikkun Bar Lidarga, which means that he's making the bar more accessible. Let's assume there's water in this bar, it's a cistern of water, and it's very difficult to go down and scoop up the water. By creating a little bit of a step around the top of the bar, he has now improved the structure and the accessibility of the bar. In that case, he's in violation of a malacha d'oraisa of makav v'patish. Don't worry. Don't you dare hesitate. The brisa continues. Rosh and Ninalo Delis Bifnei Tinok. He sees that the child got locked into a room, and maybe the child will be so overwhelmed by fear because the door slammed that it's locked and the child can't open it. He could die from pachad. Shovra, break down the door. Motzias hatinok, and he takes out the baby. Hazor is a reizim meshubach. V'ein tzarich lito rishus mibezdin. Now, what's the extra chiddush of ein tzarich lito rishus mibezdin? Afal gav de kamachavin lemitbar b'shifei. What he's going to do is he's going to break down the door, and he's going to make planks, wooden slats, out of the breakage of the door, which is called in the Lashon Kodesh nisavim. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term. And he's benefiting by this because these strips of wood can now serve after Shabbos as firewood. So when he breaks down the door, he does it in a way like you can imagine doors that have, that are made up of different slats of wood that were attached one to the other. And he breaks it at the seam, if you know what I mean. And now he's got logs of wood. That's great news. He can use this for his fire tomorrow. So now he's involved in the violation of a malacha d'oraisa of tikkun mana. Perhaps he's involved in meleches soser. Soser means when you break down a structure, but it's almanas livnos. And nevertheless, don't go asking questions. The child might be overwhelmed by fear. By the way, this is the first Gemara that I saw where the Gemara has a psychological approach to the laws of medicine. It's kind of rare. Oh, I think I may have encountered it actually one more time when they separated a child from its parent, and the child went off the deep end because he was so overwhelmed by fear. I was assuming that the psychological well-being of a person is absolutely necessary. Psychologically, he could suffer such a trauma that he might even die from it, especially in the case of a child. Another case in the Brisa. Now we talk about a fire that broke out on Shabbos. And the Torah, in the list of 39 malachas, has kibui, extinguishing a fire, again under certain circumstances, is a violation of Meleches Shabbos. Mechabim umafsikim b'pnei adleika. Mafsikim means that what we're allowed to do in order to contain the fire, we take a big metal barrel and we fill it up with water, and we create a kind of a trap, so to speak, a kosel a fence that surrounds the fire and contains the fire. What's going to happen is that the fire, as it spreads, is going to break down this vessel, and the water is going to come out and extinguish the fire. And once again, Azor Zarezim Meshubach, V'ein Tzorch Lito Rishus Mi Bezdin, V'yaf Agav Deka Memachech Makuche. Now, these words, Memachech Makuche, are really one and the same. It's just a noun and a verb. The noun was made into a verb. And here's where we get very close to our discussion of before of violating one Shabbos for the sake of next Shabbos. What do we mean? That there are what's called gechalim. We know that gechalim are coals, hot coals. And you can really use these coals. They're so hot to make a to make a campfire, to cook something over these gechalim. So now what he's doing is he's lowering the gechalim and he flattens them out. Now, what does he gain by doing it in that particular way? If it's close enough to Motzi Shabbos, then he'll be able to benefit from this because he can cook his, I don't know, the Americans call it hot dogs. Every country has its own name for it. But he can cook a steak on these gechalim. So what he does is, in order to make sure that this fire will not get out of hand, he flattens the gechalim, and he benefits from that. And therefore, I might think that he's in violation of a malacha, and this would probably be a malach of kibui, but he's doing the kibui in a way that he benefits from it after Shabbos. Utzricha. Now the Gemara says that it's necessary and justified for the Brisa to go through all these different scenarios, and each scenario has an extra chidush. If we only had the case of Yam where the baby fell into the sea, we would have said he doesn't need rishus from Bezdin mishum de'ada hachi dahachi till he gets to Bezdin to ask the question. Ozele, the child will be lost. The waters of the sea, Nebuch, the waves will carry out the child, and finito. Avolabar, in the case of a cistern of water, the Kol Yosef, where the child is sitting there inside the bar, and the sakana, the danger, is not getting worse and worse with every moment, like it is while he's stuck in the sea. Ema, I might think, he should not be Mechal Shabbos without getting license and permission from the Beis Din Tzricha. So the Mishnah, the Brisa wants to tell me another chiddush that even in the case of Tinok Shenafal Bar, he doesn't require Netilas Rishus. There is a chashash. We suspect the child might be overwhelmed with fear, and he'll be shocked that he's fallen into a cistern of water, and he might die just from the fear. The iash meaning labar, and if the Bryce had told me only that in the case of a child that fell into a bar, I would have said the reason why the sakana, the danger, is immediate, is mishum de mavis. The child is overwhelmed by fear when he falls into a bar. Avol minala deles. Okay, the door was locked. Efshar de Yosef bahai gisa umishabesh le bamzuge. It's possible that the gadol, right, the mature person, the adult, will go to the other side of the door, and he will somehow be able to, what's the word I want to use, to amuse the child in such a way that he starts knocking on the door and he starts making noises and he plays bells and he's like playing a game with the child. And this is going to calm down the child psychologically and mitigate his fear so the child will survive. It's an easy go. You have a case where a child fell in, he's locked up in a room, and you start running around this side and that side, playing games and talking to the child and making believe that this was all part of a game. Sricha, I need the Mishnah to tell me that even in this case where the door was locked on a child, and the child is trapped in the room, we don't need Netilas Rishus. Adarabba, it's prohibited to run around and ask for Bezdin's approval. We got to move like the speed of light. This is called Pikuach Nefesh. And finally, we get to the last case of the Brisa, Mechabim Umafsikim Lamali. Why does the Brisa have to tell me that he doesn't need Rishus in a case of a fire? Fire is the most dangerous mazik that we have. We have to do everything in our power to contain the fire and extinguish the fire. And the Gemara answers, let's say that the Duleka fell in that chotzer, in that courtyard. But we have people in this courtyard that don't have the ability to run away from the fire if the fire catches and the wind blows the fire from one chotzer to the contiguous chotzer. So we're in chotzer number 2. The fire is in chotzer number 1. In chotzer number 2, we have weak people, old people, very young people. They don't have the ability to move and run away from the fire. In an event that the fire might spread from one courtyard to this courtyard, all the lives of those who cannot get out are in danger. And in that case, we will do whatever we have to do in order to contain the fire. We are allowed to put out the fire in another chotzer. There are no residents there. That chotzer is completely vacant. But we will put out the fire because of the possibility that it might spread to this chotzer, our chotzer, where there are cholim and zkenim and ktan. Rav Yosef, Rav Yehuda Shmuel, holchu b'pikuach nefesh acharov. When we're dealing with a case of danger to human life, and there are goyim there are Jews there, we don't count heads, and we don't say, well, Rov tells me that this person is probably a goy. The Gemara says, hey, Chidomi, what exactly is the case that Shmuel has in mind? Ein holchin b'pikuach nefesh acharov. If you're going to tell me the Ika Tisha Yisrael v'kusi echad beinayu. Let's say, for example, there was an avalanche, and people are caught in the debris, and we don't know if the debris fell on a Jew or a goy. But 9 out of the 10 people that were affected by this landslide were Jews. So Shmuel's going to tell me Eida Holchin Achar Harov, which means that we have a suffix here. It's as if it's 50-50, 5 Jews and 5 Goyim, and if we don't override the Shabbos, that's for sure impossible, because Rubi Yisrael did it. We certainly have a case of Rov Yisrael. We have to assume 9 out of 10 chances that a person who was caught under the debris, and we have to save him on Shabbos by violating the Shabbos, he's a Jew. 9 out of 10 chances that he's a Jew. So why would Shmuel say we don't rely on Rov? So the Gemara says, and Inami, and if you're going to tell me Palgu, maybe it's a case of 50%. Sean, I can't hear. Oh. Even if it's a case of 50% Jews and 50% Goyim, Safek Nefashos Lahakel. We certainly have a 50-50 chance that it's a Jew that's trapped under the landslide. That's Safek Nefashos, and we have a principle of Safek Nefashos Lahakel. Ella, but let's go the other direction. There are 9 Goyim and only 1 Jew. Te'ika Tisha Kusim, the Yisrael Echad. So now the debris falls on 10 people, 9 of whom are goyim, and 1 is a Jew. And we know that there's 1 individual trapped under the debris, and his life is in danger. 9 out of 10 chances are that it's a guy. Now, again, later on, you'll see that we'll violate the Shabbos for a guy as well, but right now we don't know that. That's classified information. So now Shmuel is telling me that Eid Holchid Achar Rov, and even though 9 out of 10 chances are that there's a guy, a kusi, we still will violate the Shabbos for the 10% chance that it might be a Jew. So the Gemara says, Hanami Pshita, I don't need Shmuel for that. Why? Because Havile Kavua, V'chol Kavua, Kemechzal Mechzegami. Okay. Now, at this point, we have to take a little bit of a break for some background information. Again, I'm going to assume that you know nothing about this principle of kavua, even though you might know it like the back of your head. But I always have to go l'chumra and assume that you've never heard of it. So what's called kavua? In general, when you have a mixture and one of the members of that mixture, undefined and unidentified, has to be identified, then we will apply one of 2 principles. One principle is called kol de parish miruba parish, and the other is called kol kavua kemechzal mechzal. What does that mean? If, let's say, I find one of those 10 members of the mixture in a different location, meaning it was taken out of the mixture, then I apply the principle of rov. When I want to identify this piece that came out of the mixture, out of the tarovis, I will assume that the identity of this piece that I found outside the tarovis is the rov. The rov will determine for me, that's what the Torah says, what the identity, what's the nature of this particular item. I'll give an example. We have 10 butcher shops in town. 9 out of 10 will sell kosher meat. 1 out of the 10 sells non-kosher meat. And I find a piece of meat outside of the stores, in the kikar, in the outer area. I will apply the principle of rov, and therefore, since 9 out of 10 butcher shops are selling kosher meat, I can determine and assume the identity of this piece of meat that is from the rov, and it's kosher, and I can eat it. Why? Because kol de parish, miruba parish. Parish means it came out of its original place where it was, the original stationary place, and now it's on the move, so to speak. It's been moved out. And for our purposes, I don't care how it got moved out, whether somebody took it out, or a bird took it out, or the wind took it out, it makes no difference. And I'll apply rov. However, there's another possible suffix, and that's called kavua. What does that mean? It's not that I find a piece of meat and I have questions as to where it came from, which butcher shop did it come out of when I applied the rov, but rather I went into one of the various butcheries and I don't know whether or not that butchery sells kosher meat or non-kosher meat. Now let's assume there's no way of clarifying it. 9 out of 10 of the butcher shops, which I might have gone into any one of them, are selling kosher meat. One butcher shop in town sells treif for the goyim in town, or to feed your dog. It's cheaper meat. And you don't know which store you went into. Then it's called kavua kemechzal mes, which means that you're not allowed to eat the meat. What do you mean I'm not allowed to eat the meat. 9 out of 10 of the butcher shops are providing kosher meat. Why not rely on the rove? The Torah says that if the suffix is bekvius, it's not bepricha, it's not a piece that came out, but the suffix is one of the stores. We don't know which store, the nature of the store. The store is, the butcher shop is kavua. Kavua means it's set in its place. It's not moving. It's not going anywhere. It's not like the binyan hashlishi that comes down from heaven. The store is there. That's where it is. And that's where it will be. That's kavua. So you've got 9 out of 10 butcher shops that are selling kosher meat. You're not allowed to eat this meat because we cannot paskin on any one of those butcher shops that it definitely is providing kosher meat, even though we know that 9 out of 10 are doing so. In this case of Shmuel, where the debris fell, there was an avalanche, Rachmana litzlan, and the body, which is somehow lost in the debris, is kavua, meaning that all the bodies together were underneath and suffered from the landslide. No one's moving anywhere. There's no movement. There's no kol de parish. Imagine a case where you've got 10 bodies and you have to identify one of the 10. That's kavua. And we don't break it down into a rov of miut. It's considered mechza al mechza, 50-50. And that's good news in the case of 9 knanim, 9 goyim, kusiyah, and 1 Jew. Why? Because since the suffix is b'makom kavua, we're going to apply the principle of kol kavua k'mechza mechza dami as if there were 5 Jews and 5 kusiyim, and therefore suffix nefashis lahakel. So once again, Shmuel has not told me anything that I didn't know. Lo tzricha, says the Gemara, you know what the chiddush of Shmuel is? De parush lechatzer acheres. What happens is, you've got a group of residents that live in one building or in one courtyard. One of them stepped out of the building. He left the courtyard. He was porish. Lechatzer acheres. And now we know that one of them is trapped under the debris. The kvius is completely batel. Why? Because of parish. Right? The people moved out of their original kvius. So once again, so what's the chiddush of Shmuel? Now the time I would have thought, called the parish meruva parish. I should be able to apply the principle. I have to apply the principle of kol de parish meruba parish. And since there are 9 in the original chatzah, the first chatzah, there were 9 kusiyim and only 1 Jew, I have to assume that the one unidentified body that was parish came from the rov, which means that the rov will determine that he's a guy. I can't override the Shabbos. Kamashmal and Shmuel says, we're going to do whatever we have to do and violate the Shabbos to be what's called mefakeches hagal, to remove the debris and save that person because he might be a Jew. Even though the Torah tells me Rov determines the identity. In this case, the identity is that of a guy, which doesn't justify violating the Shabbos. The answer is that in Pikuach Nefesh, there is no Rov. There's no such thing as Rov. So even though, let's say in our statistical probability chart, there's only a 10% chance that this is a Jew, for the sake of a 10% chance, we will violate the Shabbos. I don't know if you like to hear stories, but I'll tell you a story. My father told me that he heard this story twice from his Rebbe, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, Zichrono Livroch. My father learned for 5 years by Rav Moshe, and on 2 occasions, Rav Moshe told the story word for word, identically. If you know the Soloveitchiks, they're very careful about the Masorah. And he told the story exactly as it happened. And he told the story to his Talmidim twice over the course of 5 years. And he said it exactly the same way twice. What was the story? Rav Moshe and his family came to visit the city of Brisk, where his father, Reb Chaim, was the Rav. And Rav Moshe's oldest son, his name is Yosef Dov, Yosef Ber, he was my Rebbe, was a very young infant, and he came down with a very high fever. Now, keep in mind that back in the day, they didn't have electricity like they have today. They had kerosene lamps, which you could see the fire. Fire was fed by the oil. The doctor comes, and the physician says that the child is running a very high fever. And what you have to do now is turn down the fire, because the light, the bright light of the kerosene lamp, is disturbing the child. And a child with high fever, we have to make sure not to disturb the child, make the child as comfortable as possible so he can fight off the fever. So Reb Chaim, who's on one side of the room, turns to his son, Reb Moshe, and he tells him immediately to turn down the fire on Shabbos. Reb Moshe starts shaking. He had never violated the Shabbos in his life. And Reb Chaim picked up his right foot, slammed it down on the ground, and yelled at his son, Amaretz, you're an ignoramus. And my father said that the second time that Reb Moshe told the story, Reb Moshe lifted up his right foot exactly as he did in the first story, slammed it down and yelled at Amaretz. And you have to understand, my friends, that the worst insult that you could give a Talmid Chacham in Lithuania, at least in those days, was to call him an Amaretz. Want to call him a Shegitz? That's not so bad, but call him an Amaretz, that's the worst. When it comes to Pikuach Nefesh, we don't delay. And whatever is necessary, the doctor tells you, he's an expert, that the high, intense light is disturbing the child's eyes, and the child is running a very high fever. I don't know if it was 104, 105, I don't know what it was. You got to listen to the doctor immediately without hesitation. Hazaris hareza b'tshuva. And if you're not a Zaris, then you're an Amoritz. And when Rav Moshe was elected the Rav of a city called Rasain, Rav Chaim said goodbye to him, wished him well, and he said that you must, I command you as my father, that you must implement my rule of Pikuach Nefesh, and if someone is ill on Yom Kippur, he's going to eat Kisu'udas Shlomo HaMelech B'Shaita. If he's a Choleb Sheish Bo Sakana, his life is in danger, he should eat a full meal. Why was that such a big deal that Reb Chaim had to give this as a last will and testament as his son Reb Moshe was going on to take the Rabbanis in Rasayan? The answer is because if you look at Shulchan Aruch, you get a different impression. The impression that you get is that at a Chol Sheyesh Bo Sakana Yom Kippur, Machilin also Kal Tchila. We give him in little drapes and drabs every 9 minutes after talking to Achilas Pras. We'll feed him a little bit more. And we'll do whatever we can to limit the violation of Yom Kippur. So they used to ask Reb Chaim, how can you paskin against the Shulchan Aruch? And there are two traditions. Probably both of them are right. Reb Chaim gave two different answers on two different occasions. On one occasion, says, I'm not being Mekil in Shabbos, I'm being Machmir in Pikuach Nefesh. And on other occasions, he would say that the Shulchan Aruch is talking about a chole who, if we don't administer medical treatment with a violation of the Shabbos, then he will become a chole sheyesh bo sakana, meaning that he's ill, and we're afraid that as a result of the illness will get more and more severe, and eventually he will be in a life-threatening situation. But right now, as is, we say in Hebrew, Basheru Shal, he's not a chol sheyesh bo sakana. We will violate Yom Kippur for him so that he shouldn't become very weak and become a chol sheyesh bo sakana. But he's not right now, not yet a chol sheyesh bo sakana. And therefore, machilin so kal tchila. But if he's already a chol sheyesh bo sakana, and the fast is endangering his life, then there's no Yom Kippur. I remember I once, I sort of feel guilty about this to this day. One time, a little bit before Yom Kippur, my wife was pregnant with our first child, who, by the way, is a physician. And it was getting close to Yom Kippur. So I came up to the Rav after Shir, and I said, Rebbe, what should I do? My wife is pregnant. She was, I think, in her 7th month of advance. And what about Yom Kippur? So he looked at me and he said, she should fast. But then he added, and he starts describing symptoms. If she sees any of the symptoms, she should eat. And here's where I feel guilty. I said to the Rav, you mean I should give her small portions of... No, he said. Banged his hand down on the table. And he said, feed her kisuda shlomo hamelech b'shaito. And I knew I was going to get that answer. Just he didn't call me an Amaretz, but he could have. But I wanted to hear it from him, you know. Aini, the Gemara asks, is this really so? That Shmuel is talking about a case where the people went from one chotzer into another chotzer, and therefore we're going to apply the principle of kol de parish meruba parish, but ein holchin acharov, but because nefesh ein holchin acharov. Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rav Yochanan, Tisha Kusi in Yisrael echad. And there's a mapolis, a landslide that fell on one of them. So again, we have 9 goyim and 1 Jew. Says Rabbi Yochanan, Im nafla bi otza chatzer. If it fell in that courtyard, the avalanche, where they are residing and presently residing, mefakh. Then we have a safek nefashos. But b'chatzer acheres, if the avalanche fell in a different chatzer, then we will not violate the Shabbos. Ein mefakh. Why? Because it's rov kusir. And now we're going to apply the principle of kol de parish, miruba parish. We're going to assume that the mapoles fell on a nachri. So we see that even in the case of pikuach nefesh, we apply the principle of holchin achar rov, and Rabbi Yochanan now contradicts Shmuel. Lo kasha, ha, and then ha. The first ha is referring to Shmuel. Ha, the case of Shmuel, is the parish kulu, that the entire group went from one chutz, they evacuated one chutz, and they went into a different chutz. And therefore, since we know for sure that there's one Jew amongst them, out of the 10 human beings, one of them was a Jew, they all upped and moved and reestablished themselves in the nearby chutzner. Therefore, we apply the principle of ein holchin b'pikuach nefesh acharov. We know that there's a 10% chance that there's a Jew over here. But the case of Rabbi Yochanan, is the parish miktsasayim, that only a few members of the residents and the first chotzer were parish, and they went into the second chotzer. We don't even know if there's a Jew there. We have no clue. No one can tell us whether a Jew left the first chotzer and went into the second chotzer. And therefore, we have a situation of holchin achar arov. Why? Because we only reject holchin achar rov in pikuach nefesh when there's chazaka sheyesh Yisrael, when we know that there's a Jew, we're not sure if this is the Jew or not, but we know that there was a Jew over here, then the law is that no matter what reduced percentage, statistically, it's very unlikely that what you're finding here under the debris, the body that got caught under the debris is a Jew, but nevertheless, ain't holchin, the vikuach nefesh acharo. But if we don't know that there was a Jew in the second chotzer, a number of members of the first chotzer picked up and went into the second chotzer, we have no clue that one of them was the Jew, the single Jew out of 10, then we apply the principle of rov, even in pikuach nefesh. And this explanation of Rabbi Yochanan has tremendous repercussions in halacha, that we will paskin based on a rov, even in pikuach nefesh, if we don't have what's called huchzak sham Yisrael. And I'll just read to you the Rosh who explains Rabbi Yochanan. The ofan shekulam parchum min hachatzer, all of them left the first chatzer, and b'shas akirosam, when they all got up and left and packed out of the first chatzer, parash echabim lechatzer cheres, and a mapolis fell, is kevon she'akru kulam ein kal Yisrael kavua. The imkain haklal bazeu shekol the parish meruba parish the ein mefach. So Rabbi Yochanan, who will apply the principle of kol the parish meruba parish, and he will not allow us to violate the Shabbos, that's a case where all of them left the first chotzer, but one of them went into the other chotzer, and a mapolis fell. Now, once they all left, we no longer have kavua. Everybody's on the move, and there's no one who's kavua and set in a stationary place. And now, out of the group that left, one of them was poresh and went into another chatzah. We're going to apply the principle called the parish meruba parish. What's the case of Shmuel? The ofen shepiresh rak echad lechatzah acheres. Only one of the group of 10 people in the first chatzah left and went into a second chatzah. The others who remained behind, they are left in kvirus, and therefore they have a din, a status of mechzal mechzal. Now we can apply the principle of suffik nefashis lahaki, meaning the one that left the group, he's leaving a group that's made up legally, halachically, of 5 Jews and 5 goyim. What are you talking to me? There are 9 goyim. But the answer is, since the people who remained in the original chatzeh are kavua bimkomon, therefore already on the group we have a psak, a rule of kol kavua kemechzal mefzedon. And then nafkamina is very important, because now if one of them leaves the courtyard and we don't know which one left and debris fallen him, can we violate the Shabbos? The answer is there's a 50-50 chance, according to the halachic guidelines, that he's a Jew because he was poresh from mechzal mechzal. This is the way the Rosh interprets the difference between Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel. Now, Rabbosai, before we leave, I just want to run an idea by you. We are coming now towards the end of Masechet Yoma. And I'm thinking a little bit down the line, maybe even as early as next Wednesday, that perhaps it's time to try a different Masechet. But the only thing is, the Masechet that I would like to try, or at least one particular part of it, is Yevamos. Now, in the yeshiva world, when you mention the name Yevamos, they go crazy. They start growing hives all over their body because Yevamos is a great challenge. But maybe we could choose that perek that is a little bit less complicated. I mean, It's hard to find such a perek in Yevamis. But if you leave it to me, I'm going to choose a perek that I think you'll enjoy. So if we have a consensus, as the Rav Soloveitchik used to say, let's take a vote and then I'll decide. We knew that whatever we voted for, he would never give us that the benefit of that. But if that's okay with you. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning it now is that I would like you to bring a Gemara Yevamis next Wednesday night. Have it prepared. Go out and buy one if you have to. If you can't afford it, then let me know. I'll make a magbit. We'll raise the money. But seriously, I need you to get a Gemara Yevamis, and there's a very good chance that we'll learn Yevamis next week. Okay, then? If there are no more comments.
That's tough.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, Lila Tov, and thank you very much.